Hi everyone, I think I'll get started. I'm sure there'll be lots more people that are joining us as we go through, and I'll continue to monitor that. But just at the outset, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for agreeing to do this. Just so everybody that's just joined knows, this is being recorded. So if you don't want your face to be on there or anything like that, then please just turn your camera off. And if you're not talking or you're not asked a question, etc., please just keep your mics on mute so that there's not any interference. This session today is all about the SQE, what to expect, how you can prepare for it, what materials you can use to get ahead and to try and tackle these mammoth exams, which a lot of people struggle with. So I'm hoping that after today, you can find that quite useful in terms of moving forward, in terms of your studying, or if you're retaking, you can find out how people that have passed, some people quite recently actually on the panel have passed, how they did it and how you can hopefully do it next time. So what we'll do to start with, we'll do some introductions, but just to sort of start off, my name's Paige. I'm a criminal defence solicitor. I did the bar course, but then did the SQE to become a solicitor, and I completed that earlier this year. So I'm now working as a solicitor full time. I'm going to go through each of our panelists now, and they're going to introduce themselves to you. So I'll start with Alana, if I can.
Hi everyone. So I've just passed my SQE2. I am due to be admitted on Monday actually, so very, very new. I studied at St Mary's in Twickenham and got my law degree. I took a bit of time out and then I started as a legal sec in a local firm. I then worked my way up, did my 2 years training, and they funded the SQE for me, which I did part-time alongside my job. I work in the family and private client departments now, and will probably continue to do so moving forward.
Amazing. And what about you, Olivia?
Hi everyone. I am a first seat trainee, just started at CMS. I studied at the University of Nottingham, studied law of Australian law. I worked for a bit until I got my training contract, and then I studied at the University of Law on the LLM legal practice prep course. I sat SQE1 twice, so I resat one of the exams because I failed by 1%. However, I just recently passed SQE2 and started my training contract.
Perfect. And what about you, Chloe? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm just figuring out how to use my laptop. So I'm Chloe. I'm an associate in an aviation litigation team. I did my SQE whilst doing my training contract. So I sat SQE1 July last year and SQE2 in January. And yeah, I guess the only thing that I can talk about quite specifically is maybe timings of the results, because my training contract finished pre-getting SQE results. I think it takes about 16 to 18 weeks. But I did pass both first time. Yay.
And what about you, Holly?
Hi everyone. So I started my law degree at Nottingham Trent University. That was after, probably quite a few of you can relate, not getting the A-level results that I wanted. Thought it was the end of the world, literally was horrible. So sucked it up, went to uni and worked my arse off and managed to get a first-class law degree to try and make up for my A-levels. And then I couldn't get a job anywhere for ages. I finally managed to get my foot in the door as a legal assistant in a property department, and I then applied internally for a training contract, and they were doing the SQE route. So I had to, I then finally got that, which I was really relieved, and I worked full-time whilst doing my training contract. And I've now moved into the family department. Luckily, I did pass the SQE1 and 2 first time, but just about. So I'm not very naturally intelligent. I just have had to work very, very hard.
Brilliant. And just as sort of an overview for people before we get into how people studied, etc. For those that don't know, the SQE is the Solicitors Qualifying Exam. If you want to become a solicitor, mostly now you have to sit this exam. Some people are still doing the legal practice course, but I think that ends very shortly. As part of the SQE, there's an SQE1 that you have to pass before you can move on to SQE2. SQE1 are best answer multiple choice questions. There's 2 sets of exams for that. And then SQE2 is more practical skills. So you do advocacy, client interviewing, and other topics, but it's a lot more practical. For those that don't know, if there are people on here that are not aware of how the SQE works, I'm going to just pop in the comments section the details for the Solicitors Regulation Authority. You can find out what the SQE is there, what topics come up, etc. Unfortunately, because we're time limited today, we don't have the capacity to go through all of the details for what's involved in the SQE in terms of structure, when you can sit the exams, those sorts of things. But all of the information that you need for that can be found on the SQE SQESRA website, should I say. So hopefully that's there. I'm sure some of the information will come out as we go along, but I'm hoping to use these ladies' skills in terms of how to pass the SQE rather than focusing on what the SQE is. If, as we're going along as well, you have any questions, please pop them in the box. At the end, there'll be time to answer any specific questions that you have. But if you can put them in there as we go along, if there's questions that come up that I can ask as we're going through, then I'll try and do that as well to save a bit more time. Perfect. So if we can, I'm not sure, Holly, where did you, or which provider did you use for your SQE?
I used Barbri. It was one that my firm chose, so I didn't actually have the privilege of choosing one. But yeah, I did their SQE1 last July, and I did the 40-week prep course. And then I did the SQE2, which I sat in April this year, and that was the 20-week prep course.
Perfect. And I think Alana also used Barbri. Holly, can you just explain to me a little bit about the Barbri course? So how it's structured, how you use it. I also did Barbri as well, so I'm a bit more familiar with that one. But if you can just explain how it works for SQE1, first of all, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I will try as much as I can remember. What I can remember is you have a very structured personal plan. So you essentially log in and they fill out your revision plan for you, and all you have to do is follow it. So I believe that you have a certain amount of lectures a week, and then as soon as you finish the lecture, you then have a set question that you'll be asked to do. Some of them that you do, you submit and they get marked and you get feedback. Some of them are peer review, so you can actually log on and a lot of people, you can see other people's work. It's all anonymous and you get feedback that way. Other times it will be more interactive session of how to do something else. But it's very, very, I'd say practical, which I loved about the SQE1. You didn't even really have to do a plan yourself. If you just followed it, it essentially got you there. It was really, really good. I'd also say that, if I'm trying to remember correctly, you also had tutor calls. So you were assigned a tutor group. You got to know them. That was really, really helpful. You had, I believe, 3 one-to-one sessions with your allocated tutor, and then a couple of the group ones. But what I did with my group is we made an external chat, which was really, really helpful as well. Yeah, that's all I can remember, I think. But yeah, it was really, really useful. And you get given 2 textbooks. I've actually got one of them here. This is the revision guide. It's quite small, but they basically teach you at Barbri that you trust their way of learning. Whereas when I first started, I very much thought it would be like my law degree. I thought I'd watch the lecture and write handwritten notes word by word. In the beginning, I even started pausing the lecture And my tutor said, no, just trust the process, stop writing notes. And it took me a while, but then I just trust it full on, and it really, really did help me.
Perfect. And I know you said that you did the 40-week course and you was obviously working full time. I'm just wondering, how did you manage that? Because I think that's something that people are interested in, how you manage studying and working alongside each other. And also because I know that Barbri allocates certain amounts of hours. How many hours did you have to do sort of each week as part of that course?
I think each week I had 20 hours that I had to get through. I'm not going to lie to people, I was behind on my PSP quite a lot. I caught up in the end because luckily they allocate you some blank weeks at the end just to go over your notes. So I won't lie, I wasn't on top of everything. My firm were kind enough to give me a study day a week, so I would really push for that. I had a Monday, I think, off, so that really helped. So I tried to get my week done in that day, and then if I needed to, then I would spend a few hours, at the weekend, and then closer to the exams, I did spend my evenings. So it was really full on. But to be honest, I couldn't afford it otherwise, so I didn't really have a choice. But yeah, it's doable, so don't panic.
Perfect. And I'll just move on to you, Alana, if I can, while we're talking about Barbri. Which course did you do? Did you do the full-time one or the part-time one?
I did actually the same as Holly. I did 40 weeks and I took mine in July last year, and then started the SQE2 in October, November time, and then took the exams in April. Really similar approach. Oh, you go.
Sorry, go on.
No, carry on.
I was just going to say, Holly focused quite a lot on the SQE1. Can you explain to everybody how the SQE2 preparation worked, and also how you kept on top of the SQE1 revision?
So, I mean, I definitely panicked on the revision of the actual law side of things for SQE2. I think the SQE2 prep course very much focuses on the skills that you need for all of the exams and not so much on recapping the law. There was a really helpful section within Barbri that basically allowed you to re-access all of the notes you needed for SQE2's content, which I would have recommended, if I could go back and do it again, to at least pick up 1 or 2 of those a week alongside the structured course. The course is slightly less structured with SQE2 in comparison to SQE1, but it still allocates you a number of tasks per week, and that usually involves at least like 1 piece of work uploaded. So the deadlines are slightly stricter in that sense that if you miss them, you wouldn't be able to get your mark worked. And they also had an SQE like Barbri promise. So if you did fail, providing you did all the mock questions and stuff, you could redo the whole course if you did fail.
Perfect. And could you just give us a so how many hours per week did you have to?
It worked out between 8 and 10, I would have said, was the average in terms of the work allocated to you. Some of that you could do a lot quicker, some of that you could take a lot longer. It just really depended how quickly you did the tasks that they provided to you. There was pretty much a lecture for every single one of the skills, followed by some prep questions, following you through how to structure your answers, that kind of thing. But yeah, about 8 to 10 hours, I would have said, per week.
And did you have to study the law side of things from SQE1 alongside that, or could you forget about the SQE1 stuff?
No, you very much had to remember a lot of what you were taught in SQE1 to answer the SQE2 questions. I think they focus very much on the skills rather than the law. So one thing I would have, again, would recap on the SQE1 topics whilst you were doing alongside the prep for the specific exams. They didn't really prep you again for the SQE2. They kind of based it on the fact that you would have already taken the prep course with them for SQE1 with Barbri. That would have semi-prepared you enough, but definitely that gap between SQE1 and SQE2 can mean you forget a lot.
Perfect. And did you use any other materials apart from the Barbri course?
I didn't. I, again, put my full faith in Barbri that they would have given me everything I needed. we had 2 large textbooks and a smaller revision textbook for SQE1. And then I pretty much focused on the revision textbook from SQE1 for the content for SQE2. It made it a lot more manageable, and I felt like because a lot of the exams were very much based on the skill side of things, if you could remember specific points of law, but explain yourself well, the marks were there. So focusing on specific, less breadth of knowledge from SQE1, but nailed the skills, you were a lot better off.
Perfect. And just before I go on to Olivia and Chloe, because I think they also studied at the same provider, but that was ULaw. Holly, did you use any other materials, or did you only use the Barbri material?
Yeah, I only used the Barbri material. When I exhausted the mocks, I did get Googling, and I think I came across QTLS. I think it is something along those lines. And I used the SRA, the ones that they gave you. I used those as well because I found they were probably most similar to the exam. And really anything that I could find, I just tried to go through. Yeah, more mocks the better, I'd say.
Perfect. I'm going to move on to you now, Olivia, if I may. So I understand that you did your course with ULaw. Did you do both parts of it with ULaw?
Yes, I was on, I think it's a whole year course, or slightly just under a whole year, and you do SQE1, and then I did the master's bit, so the SQE plus, and then the SQE2 afterwards.
Perfect. Did you want to just give everybody on here a bit of a rundown about how it works practically? So I know that Alana and Holly were explaining that they got 3 textbooks basically, and all of the material that they needed was in that, and then they had the lectures and the question banks. How do ULaw do it? Do they give you
So you'll get, you won't get physical textbooks of ULaw, they'll all be online, but there's a lot of textbooks. I think there's maybe about 20 for each subject, and you've got textbooks for the underlying law and also the academic law, or like the law that you'll be learning in the course. I think one big thing with ULaw, which I'm not sure it's the same with Barbri, is that you need to rely on your already understanding of the academic law. So they will not teach you subjects like contract, tort, public, criminal. So you'll need to use their books separately outside of the classes. And also something that was different for me is you basically do a lot of your learning from the reading. So there'll be lots and lots of recommended reading for the class, and you will do all your learning from that reading. And the workshop classes that you have are basically just to sort of improve your knowledge or test that you know it. So it's not like a lecture format where they'll teach you it. It's more, you're very much self-learning yourself. So yeah, that was quite a big change for me and took a little while for me to adjust to when I started.
perfect? And I know that you said at the outset that you sat SQE1 twice.
Mm-hmm.
When you sat it the second time, was there a change in technique in terms of studying or in terms of how you
I think that one thing that there's a few things that I prioritize second time round. I think ULaw put a lot of emphasis on doing their practice questions, so their practice banks are really, really good. However, don't just rely on them, because you'll realize that a lot of the questions, just the facts or the names change. So you'll be memorizing just the answers to their questions and not that you know the law. And then also that their textbooks can be quite dense. And I feel like having done the exam, I kind of had a better view of what I actually needed to know and what I could perhaps skip. And I used Devil's Advocate, which is like a website that you can subscribe to, and they have high yield notes, and I found they're a really good format for me. very condensed, and then anything that I thought they were missing from my practice questions, I would add those in, and they were the things that I memorized second time round for my FLK1 resit, and I also memorized those for my SQE2 exam recently.
So just so I'm clear, sorry, devil's advocate, is that a question bank or are they note banks?
They have both actually. I didn't really use their question, but they have high yield notes, question banks, and then I think for an additional fee they do sort of crash courses, and they'll have someone delivering classes online, and I think they're meant to be quite useful as well.
Perfect. And moving on to you, Chloe, if I may, I know that Olivia has talked about ULaw quite a little bit, but is there anything that you would add in terms of the materials or how you sort of got hold of all of the material? Because I do know that notoriously ULaw's material, there's a lot of it and probably more than what you need. I don't know. But how
I think the first thing to kind of point out here is that everyone is going to do a slightly different course depending on why and how they are doing it. So I actually did a graduate apprenticeship, and sorry, I should have mentioned this at the start. So I did my law degree, and then I joined my law firm as a legal assistant, and they then put us onto the SQE as an apprenticeship. So that meant that we worked 4 days a week doing our training contract, and then 1 day a week we attended university. Now I'm saying that in that way because it was a self-taught SQE course. And like Olivia said, the textbooks are online, but the first thing that I did was say, I need them in hard copy. And I would recommend anyone doing an online course to get a hard copy textbook, just because it meant that you can highlight it, read it, do whatever you want to it, burn it when you hate it. It's absolutely fine, burn it at the end. And so you are right, there is a textbook per subject. And I really liked that. I think I like to have all of the information. I'm a litigator, so we like to just read everything. And so I read all of those textbooks. And then I kind of wrote them in my own words. But I found them very helpful. And I think I also heard of Devil's Advocate. I lived with a trainee who was also doing SQE, which I guess when we talk about study, I'll come on to talk about, but she used the Devil's Advocate notes. And I did see them, and I didn't like them, just because I think the way that I learn is I need to understand how and why. And they are very surface level. This is what you need to know. It doesn't really go into the why the law is the way it is, which I think is very helpful, because I think these SQE exams are really tough. And I think because of the NDAs and the confidentiality surrounding these exams, it is very tricky to know what they're going to ask you. So I think the way that you can prepare yourself is understanding the law and why it's the way it is, because that means when you get a question, you can understand, what they're trying to get at. Or, the way I kept saying when I read a question, I would say, okay, if I was making the law, what would I want the law to do in this situation? And I think that is where having a really good understanding of all of the long reasonings and judgments and policy and regulation, I think is very helpful. And so I think it really is finding out how you learn. I think that's very, very key. Because yes, there are those Devil Advocate notes, and they have a question bank. I also attended actually one of their financial services lectures, because that was one of the subjects I really didn't get, still don't. And I don't know how helpful I found it, but it gave me key points. So I think if there's something that you're really struggling with and your SQE provider hasn't really got it through to you, and you've Googled and you've done everything, you're still not getting it, maybe try and look at one of these other providers. I am quite keen to not pay for extra things. I think finance is a huge barrier to the legal profession, and I think we are already spending lots of money on revision cards, highlighters, things like that. And I think particularly if you are working whilst doing your SQE, ask the people around you before you pay for these extra resources, because you've worked with people that write the textbooks or that write the PLC notes, so they're your best bet. Sorry, I've rambled and digressed. I do apologise.
No, perfect. All very useful information. I know that there you was getting on to study techniques and exam prep, and that's what I want to move on to next. So, Chloe, I'll start with you if I may, because she was just getting into it. What would you say worked well for you? What didn't work well for you in terms of exam techniques, and what strategies did you use? Is there any tips that you can give?
Definitely. So I think a really good thing for everybody to do is maybe understand what type of learner they are. So whether they're a visual learner, kinesthetic learner, audio, there's lots of different ways that we learn. And I really do learn by doing. So I would have the textbook open on my table, and as I'm reading it, I'm writing it in like a note form. And I would do that for literally every textbook. And then from my own notes, I would condense it down into a revision card or a poster or a drawing or a song. I would have various formats of the knowledge. And from that, I would then read it. Well, you've learnt it. By the time you've written it out and made a poster and a revision card, it's in your head. And then in the run up to the exam days, I was doing just loads and loads of questions. So Olivia mentioned, but ULaw have a huge question bank. And so one of the things I was concerned about was the timings. Now, I did get reasonable adjustments for my exams, which I think we'll talk about later, but I was concerned about the timings. And so I was doing 300 question quizzes like every day. And it is soul destroying, and you're never going to have to do it again, but you need to do it to get through these exams. And I think I was very lucky. I lived with another trainee who was doing the SQE with me. And so we would talk about what we were learning. We would have huge debates about why we disagreed with certain law, or, what do you think of the police powers and all of this? And I think that really helped me. And we would do the questions together, because it's single best answer, which is very difficult in a profession where you have lots of different types of lawyers and different strategies. So I think doing those questions with someone else is very, very helpful, because what you think is the best answer, someone else might not. And so to understand why they think something else is better, and it turns out it's the right answer, it's really helpful. It's like what I was saying before. I think these aren't exams where you can just learn the content for face value. I think you need to understand all of the background, policy, history, because it just means that in that exam, when they throw you a question that you've never heard of, you're already in the mindset of the people that were making the legislation, so you can predict what the answer might be.
Perfect. And I know that you was just saying single best answer, but there might be people here that don't understand what that means, or there might be people that are just starting out that think they know what that means, but then they're getting all the answers wrong. Can you just
Yeah, so the single best answer, and I have to just put a disclaimer here, this is my understanding of the exam format. But essentially, so the format, you get a kind of problem, you get a question, and you get 5 options as answers. And the single best answer alludes to the fact that all 5 could be right, but one is the most correct. Now, I mean, I've spoken to lots of people about this in practice, and yeah, it's an interesting concept. But I think the differences in those answers could potentially be something like the client may get damages, the client may get damages plus interest. So they're all kind of right. One is just the most correct.
Perfect. And I know that you talked about about doing 300 questions in the question bank a day and all of that. Do you think you can pass this exam, firstly, by cramming everything at the last minute, and or second?
I'm actually very glad you asked that, and apologies everyone, the lights in my room have just turned off, but hopefully you can still see me. So it's funny you say that, Paige, because my course was over 2 years, and I don't work very well doing something for 2 years. It's just I just couldn't get into it. So I said at the start, I sat SQE1 in July last year, and I probably started learning SQE1 content maybe March time. I started the course in the February, and I had like over a year and a half, and I left it quite late. And I think it's like what I said, everybody learns really differently, and I possibly needed the pressure of an exam to get myself into gear, and I think I've always been like that. I think what's really helpful is having a timetable. So, you know, if you can work out how many topics there are to cover, and you want to spend a week per topic, and then build in some time at the end to revise, great. But it depends on how you study. And I think everyone has done various exams in their life, and I think you know how you learn, how you study. So I don't want to advise anyone to cram or not to cram. It's, can you pass by cramming or can you not? And the only person that knows the answer to that is you. But I did want to say that, you know, I hadn't done the 2 years like ULaw wanted me to do, because that's just not how I learn. But yeah, it's a very difficult one to answer. Sorry, Paige.
No, answered like a true lawyer. Holly, I'll come on to you if I can. Are there any tips, study techniques, methods?
Hi, can you hear me? I think we're breaking up. Perfect. So in terms of study techniques, I would say for the SQE1, my biggest thing was timing, and I think we've touched on that. I found myself running out of time, or not giving myself even time to go over answers. What I will say is, if no one's familiar, in the exam, you've got the question, and you can click next and click the answer that you think is right. And I'd always recommend clicking something, even if you don't know, in case you do run out of time, like at least you've put something. But what I did for a lot of the questions that I thought, oh my God, I have no idea, or I'm stuck between two, is I would click an answer and then I'd flag it. There was a flag in the top right corner, so you could flag it. And that was me telling myself that I will come back to those at the end. But I was really sort of harsh to myself that I wouldn't allow myself to do too many flags. I'm a bit of a doubter, so if it was me, I'd flag every single question. But I got better at it. But what I was going to say, I wrote it down in the SQB1. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I did it last year, you had FLK1, which was split into two sessions. So you had the first 180 questions, which is 2 hours 33 minutes, and then the second session, 180 questions, again 2 hours 33 minutes, and then you had the exact same for FLK2. And when I did it, we had 1 day apart, which was lovely. And now I understand that people get maybe even a week apart, which is amazing. And what I was going to say is, Barbri taught us how to time in a way that you would have nearly 30 minutes left over at the end. So as soon as I started the exam, I figured out that if I did 15 questions every 20 minutes, then I would do 6 lots of these, and by the end I would have exactly 33 minutes left to go over my flagged questions, and that really helped me to keep on track. So literally the first couple of minutes, I think I gave myself those extra 3 minutes of 33 minutes to write down, okay, number one, 15 questions I need to be done by this time. And that was the first 20 minutes. And I literally wrote out the time, because the time I think goes down. So I quickly got the calculator and I worked out the timing. So that's what kept me on track. So towards the end, I knew that, you know, I could look at the time and go, okay, I'm ahead, or oh my God, I'm 5 questions behind and I needed to speed up. I think that was probably my number one tip that really, really helps me get through those exams, even where I wasn't confident. I won't lie, there was some questions that I literally looked at and I thought, I have no idea. And they were definitely flag. But then at the end, I had maybe, I don't even know, there's 180 questions. So I probably had about 30 flagged, and I was going through them. And you can be your worst enemy and just keep thinking. But you just have to tell yourself, you know, I clicked that first initial answer for a reason. Stick with your gut. Or, you know, later on you think, oh my God, I've remembered this, because sometimes your mind does go blank. And I did find at the end, when I had those flagged questions, it came back to me and I was like, hallelujah, I know the answer now. And then I either changed my answer or kept it. I would say that would be my number one tip for SQE1. In terms of revision strategies, I would say Barbri was really, really good in terms of they essentially set out your plan for you. I did also have my own study plan. I literally just downloaded like one of those Word calendars, free Word calendar, and I put each week what I wanted to focus on. And again, I left some time at the end towards the exams to go over stuff in a lot more depth. I will say I am a crammer. I did do stuff on time. I did fall behind, but believe me, I'm not. I generally, I just don't think you should feel bad having a break whatsoever. But I am really bad in the sense of I'm really bad crammer last minute. I just think, oh my God, if I'm not looking at my notes, I start to panic. But you generally don't need to do that. You don't. The amount of times you go over things, the amount of tests that you do, the mocks, you do know it and you do surprise yourself. And even at the end, when I was doing mocks, I still found, oh my gosh, I still don't know these. But even when you were getting them wrong, you look at the questions that you are getting wrong and you do start to memorize the right answers, if that makes sense. And you do see similar questions, so don't feel like it's the end of the world. But yeah, I would say one mistake I did do was start mocks too late. I felt that I wasn't confident enough in terms of the law, and I'd say for both SQE1 and SQE2, I kept telling myself, oh, I'm not ready to do full timed mocks in timed conditions. Just do them. Honestly, I fell into that, and when I came to the exams, and now I'm moving on to the SQE2, sorry, I'm overlapping. But for example, one of the tasks is a research task, and you can't really practice it too much. And when I did all the mocks, and then when I was in the real thing, I literally thought to myself, oh my gosh, why did I not do more mocks? Because you just don't know what's coming up. And, you know, I didn't do as badly as I thought I did. I actually did quite well in the research ones, but things like that, I just think definitely don't think that you don't need to do mocks in certain subject areas because you're confident, or certain types of skill exams, because I was confident in research. I just thought, you know, I do this every day at work, like how hard can it be? And I got a bit overconfident, and then when I went into the actual exam, I thought, oh gosh, I should have done a bit more practice in this area. But yeah, I'd say mocks are your best friend. Exhaust them all, and definitely work at your timing, especially for SQE1 and even for advocacy in SQE2. I would say, you know, keep an eye on your timing, and obviously for the writtens as well. I ran over in my advocacy exams and they were kind enough not to drag me out, but yeah, I was blabbering a bit too much, but luckily I got away with it. But yeah, if you can, you know, have a bit of a timing in your head, that really, really helps.
And just while we're talking about sort of the exams, Holly, I know that you mentioned that you wrote down this and you timed yourself this way? How do you do that? Because people that have not sat the exams won't know what you're actually allowed to take into that exam room or what you already get given. So can you just
Yeah, no, definitely. So for the SQE1, you, if I remember correctly, you can't take anything in. And they, in my one, they checked, you know, your sleeves, behind your ears, and all of that to make sure you haven't written anything anywhere. You left your water bottle in a separate room, but you were able to leave as and when. You just had to put your hand up, and someone would essentially escort you out. Once you sit down at the desk, I don't know if anyone has done their driving theory test, but my centre was a bit like that. It was a Pearson VUE test centre, and it was exactly how I remember doing my theory driving test. You sort of had this old, well, not old, this sort of semi-old computer. Everything worked absolutely fine, to be honest. And then you all had dividers, so you couldn't see anyone else's work. And then you had a whiteboard and a pen. I would say, first of all, make sure your pen works, because mine didn't. Luckily, the lady was quick enough to give me a new one. You're obviously not allowed to write anything down before you start. And just to reiterate, the whiteboard, it was like a laminated booklet. So don't think you're going to run out of paper if you need to write it down. So as soon as the exam started, that's when I did my 15 questions, 20 minutes would be this time, and I went through that, so I knew exactly how much time I had, and that really, really helped. In terms of the SQE2, again, you weren't allowed to bring anything in. I think you were allowed to bring your favourite pen if you were really specific, but I wasn't, and they just gave everything. You really didn't need to bring anything other than your ID. You need, I think, 2 forms of ID. So I brought my passport and my driving licence. You had to keep that on you at all times, and put it on the desk. And again, at the desk, you were given the whiteboard booklet and a whiteboard pen, and you were also given earplugs. I'd say obviously bring your own as well if you can. I did bring my own, and then one day they said I couldn't have my own, even though they were the exact same. So, but they gave us them, so I was happy. And I would definitely say for SQE2, that's another tip. Definitely use your earplugs if you get distracted, because I just didn't realise, obviously for the SQE1, you're just clicking boxes, so there's not much noise, but for the SQE2, there is constant typing, and I'm usually one to work in silence, and I was really distracted by that. Obviously it wasn't the be end and all, but you know, the earplugs massively helped. So yeah, definitely use those.
Perfect. And we'll run through the whole exam day in just a tick. But Olivia, I know you spoke a little bit about how you changed your preparation for SQE1 between the 2 sits, but I wonder if you can share a bit more information about how you prepared for SQE2, if you did anything specific outside of the course to practice your advocacy, to practice your client interviewing, that sort of thing, or if there's anything else that you can sort of give tips wise.
Yes, I think SQE2 prep course of University of Law, the sort of spoken skills like advocacy and client interviewing was really strong. So a lot of my skills and practice came from that, and they did 1 marked mock assessment at the University of Law where you could, I think both of mine were over like a video call, but you could do a practice advocacy and a practice interview, and those classes really built my skills up, and I didn't really have to do much more practice apart from that. Other than that, for all the written skills, you didn't have any marked mocks at the University of Law, so it was a lot of me trying to compile as many sort of like exemplar answers from the classes and just comparing. So I would try and do like a workbook practice question, and then I would go and look at maybe the example answer at the end, compare how far I was, and then also just if I was just thinking, oh, if I need to draft a board minutes for drafting, what do they look like? I'll go on my folder that I made of all the sort of example board minutes, and I'd look at that and try and work out what sort of key things I might have to include. So yeah, and then a lot of my practice, I think I focus more on learning the knowledge, and then kind of relied on the skills from a bit of practice, and also just because I had work experience before. I think you shouldn't forget that you really need to memorize that SQE1 knowledge, because you sort of need to know it in a bit more detail, because you actually have to speak about it or write about it, not be prompted by the multiple choice. So yeah, I think a lot of it was memorizing the knowledge, then also a bit of skills as well to make sure you could actually use that knowledge and get your marks for it.
Perfect. And Alana, if I may come to you, was there, in terms of the SQE2, was there anything that troubled you, a particular module that you didn't think you was doing very well at? And really the same for SQE1. Do you think that you have to do well in all it?
I definitely feel like in SQE1 there were definitely weaker areas. I really couldn't get my head around solicitors' accounts. And by about 2 weeks before the exam, I thought, you know what, I'm hoping minimal questions come up on this subject area and I can compensate in other areas. So I definitely feel specifically at SQE1, because I think you cover 16 topics over the 2 days. If one area is slightly weaker and you can't grasp something, then just move on. That one subject area is very unlikely to come up anyway. And if it does, it's one question of 360 questions. And if you don't get that one, then you don't get that one. In SQE2, there's obviously a few are in terms of your specific areas of law, but they obviously then cover the kind of background areas behind them for civil and criminal litigation, that kind of thing. Again, I think, as Chloe said earlier, if you have that background knowledge of the law and you can remember a lot of it from SQE1, that's your foundation for SQE2. In terms of specific facts, they're very helpful, but if you can have a breadth of knowledge across the whole topic rather than focusing on that one thing that you can't get, I would definitely work on that in general. The Barbri prep course did focus more on the surface level, I think, especially compared to ULaw with Olivia and Chloe, whereas Barbri are much more surface level in terms of their prep, especially when you focus back on SQE2. I think the one thing I really struggled with, I think, is covering both the law and the prep side of things for SQE2. It's not focused on, I don't think it's focused on in many prep courses. They expect you to have that foundational knowledge with you already, and they're just teaching you how to factor in the knowledge to the skill.
Perfect. And were there, in terms of SQE2, did you use any other resources outside of your course? So, I don't know, at work, or did you?
I didn't actually use anything outside of Barbri. I felt that they were very good. I looked over the SQE, the SRA questions, sorry, that they did produce. But I think at that point I was just so drained with going through everything. And I feel like the last week or two was really focusing on getting the knowledge down. The prep course I felt had prepped me enough for the skill side of things. But those last 2 weeks were very, very heavily focused on making sure I covered enough content based on the topics. I particularly I just did A3 sheets of paper basically for all of my topic notes ahead of the exam. I did those about 3 to 4 weeks before, and I covered probably 2 or 3 A3 sheets for each topic area. So criminal, civil, wills and probate, trust, that kind of thing. And I knew everything on that bit of paper, like the back of my hand. And I'd effectively condensed my notes from the very beginning of SQ1, from the notes I'd written in paper, then down to smaller notes than that, and then down to these A3 sheets of paper. And I felt like if I knew the bits of paper, I would have been fine to get me through. And I'm very fortunate that it did get me through in terms of the knowledge side of things.
Perfect. And I'm just going to throw a few questions out there, and anybody can answer, basically. So just for you guys. So I wonder, because I think that a lot of people wonder this, and obviously everybody here did a prep course. Do you think you could easily pass these exams if you had no prep course and no other materials available to you? Chloe, I'm going to pick on you.
I'm trying to learn to unmute myself on this computer. I'm so sorry, but that does actually, it's really good that I'm technologically inept and I could get through those SQE exams. So, no, because I don't think you're gonna, like, no one knows what questions are in the exam. No one really knows the topics. Like, there's a syllabus, but is it really a syllabus? And I think you need some sort of steer as to what's going to come up, particularly like where you've done a law degree. I think you can vaguely guess what topics are going to, like, what's in a criminal like paper, or what might come up in tort contract. But in my law degree, I didn't do financial services, I didn't do solicitor accounts, and so I think you need that steer. Having said that, and I think someone else on the panel brought it up, I think it's important that I do maybe confess that I didn't learn solicitor accounts. That's really bad, isn't it? Don't tell anyone. But I think you're not going to be able to learn absolutely everything really well. And I couldn't get my head around solicitor accounts. I really struggle with numbers, and I just didn't get it. And I tried really hard. I read all the books. I read The Devil's Advocate. I watched the YouTube videos. I drew it out. I didn't get it. I passed SQE1 in the first quintile. So I just think, bear that in mind. Like, if you're really struggling, it's okay, because you might be absolutely sensational at land law, and so it balances out. So just, I think these exams are really tough, and like we can be really, really hard on ourselves, and like mental health is a massive issue. So just wanted to mention, like, it's okay if you don't know everything really well, because you might know something else fine. But yeah, sorry, digressed.
No, perfect. Thank you. And another question for the panel is, if you've done a law degree, and I'm sure there are people that have not done a law degree, there are people that have on this Zoom, how similar is the SQE to a law degree in terms of, do you need to know black letter law, cases, that sort of thing, or is the SQE a bit more general? I'll pick on you, Olivia, because I'm looking at you.
I think it's a lot more general, but also I think me and Chloe had this, and potentially you as well, being from Nottingham. But there were some things that came up that we were never taught at Nottingham, so I had to reteach that myself. And also things like EU law. We were still in the EU when I learned it at university, so all of my notes were sort of useless from back then. So that was something that I had to teach myself. It's definitely not a focus on case law. You don't need to memorize case names at all. You barely really need to learn like statute names or section numbers unless they're really important. You just sort of need to memorize what the rule is, maybe what the exceptions are. But I think in that sense, it's a bit less detailed. It's just, you need to know sort of how the law works over quite a few different topics, but you don't need to specifically say what the judges and how they decided the law and what cases that comes from. So I think, yeah, it's not as detailed as a law degree, but also you need to make sure that your law degree taught all the relevant elements for the SQE, because I just definitely had some parts where my law degree didn't cover it at all.
Perfect. And there's lots of questions in the chat that I'm going to come to in a moment, but what I'd like to do now, if we can, is just do a bit of a rundown of the exam days, so people know what to expect, because there's not really much information out there in terms of that. So Olivia, if I can ask you, can you just give me a rundown of the SQE1 day?
Yeah, so I had quite different experiences from my first sitting and my second sitting. So my first sitting, I was in a really large assessment centre. It was in the Excel in London. So I think there was maybe about 2,000 people there. You had to get there about 7 a.m. and register. And it did take about an hour and a half to actually register, get your IDs checked. You went through different security checkpoints, checked through behind your ears and up your sleeves and all this stuff. You weren't allowed, I think, you weren't allowed any water with you at all. Your personal belongings in that one could go under your desk. So that was quite stressful. However, in my second sitting, I sat in a really tiny local assessment centre in Kent, and there was about 15 of us, and it was a lot more chilled out. You could have your water just outside the rooms. You could go have that if you wanted. So I think definitely try and think if you would get overwhelmed or if you'd have a lot of travel to go to these big test centres, and try and get a local smaller test centre if you think that would calm you down on the day, because that definitely did sort of stress me out on my first sitting.
And so you turned up at 7 o'clock, you got checked in. What time did your exams start?
I think it was a
For the
9
big
a.m.
test centre. I suppose you probably turned up later at the smaller one.
Yeah, I think it was a 9 a.m. start. But yeah, you had to be there registering for 7 a.m. So I wasn't even living in London, so I'd have to get a hotel the night before. Even then, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to be ready for the exam. So you're already tired from all of that. I think I went to a smaller test centre. I think they said get there for 8, but it took about 5 or 10 minutes to register, and then you were just sat there in a waiting room with the other people. So also starting at 9, but yeah, a lot more chilled, have a bit more time, a bit more sleep the night before. So if there are things that are important for you, then definitely try and consider it if you're able to have a choice of where you sit the SQE1.
Perfect. And then I know that somebody was explaining earlier on about how the sessions are split in terms of time. So you do the first exam, you have a break, you sit the second exam. How, in terms of the SQE1, did those breaks work? Because I also did my SQE1 at that massive test centre in London. And that was a bit of an issue.
So yeah, I think one issue with the big test centre is it takes you so long to get your stuff and get out. By the time you get your break, you're not really having that much of a break, and they will tell you make sure you're back within 40 minutes. I think you're meant to get an hour break, but you have to be back within 40 minutes to register to be back at your desk. So you kind of have a break, but it's not really enough break time. When you're in the smaller test centre, I basically had about the whole hour to sort of walk around my local town, get a bit of fresh air in the break. So that was definitely better.
Perfect. And what time did the day end for the SQE?
I'm trying to think back. I think I was out by about 3:30 maybe on the day. So it is sort of like quite a big day, big commitment, and it is sort of, I think it's a mental barrier that you kind of sit there and you just have so many questions to do back to back, then a little break, and then just do that straight away. I think that's one of the things I dreaded the most, just looking at the number of questions that were left and like, oh, still got this many to do. But yeah, I think it's about a 9 to 3:30, 4 o'clock day. But obviously if you're in a bigger test centre, you have to allow more time in the morning to get there, and also more time afterwards to actually get out and get your stuff, and then also travel home if you've had to travel far. So it can be quite a big and long day, and then you have 2 of those because you have 2 exams.
Absolutely, and I think that that's definitely something to bear in mind for the larger test centres, because when I did mine at the Exo Centre, whatever it was called, we started late because they didn't really quite know how to use the computers. So we also finished late. So just bear that in mind if you're booking transport, etc. I think that that's less likely to happen in the smaller test centres, but it does still happen. Holly, I'm going to come to you now then, if I may, and ask you about the SQE2 day and how that works.
Okay, so the SQE2, you have 12 written exams. I think that's right. And you have that 4 exams each day. And mine were, I think they still are like this, 3 days in the row. They were back to back. So I did mine in London at, I'm trying to remember now, it was at Whitechapel. So I travelled in, I think I got there for 7 a.m. Everyone is sort of standing outside, some people chatting, some people head and book. You can do whatever, you know. I was extremely nervous, crying tears into my book, which I didn't need to. It was honestly fine. There was other people that would rather, you know, they know enough by now. You know, there's not much that's going to go in at this point, so they were just, you know, chatting with other people. You go in, you need your ID, you register, they give you a little sticky label with your candidate number on, and then after that they escorted me to what room I needed to be in. And in my room, my personal test centre, there was, I think, like 4 floors, so there was quite a lot of us, and there was probably like 15 rooms, but in the individual room there was only about 10 of us, and again we had our own individual desks. They had dividers, you couldn't see anyone's screens, and then you had an invigilator that just sat at the front, and if you needed any help you popped your hand up. She was really, really lovely. I remember being in between one of my exams. I was sort of having a mini panic attack because I ran out of time, and she, bless her, she came over, she was like, she was doing a bit of meditation with me. She was like, deep breaths. She was so lovely. So they were all really kind. But what happens is you have 4 exams. I don't think you necessarily know the order of what they're going to be in skills wise, such as like writing, drafting, case and matter analysis, or whatever the other one is. Do you know what? I've literally erased it. It's so bad. But there is 4. I promise there's another one. And then you have the first 2 back to back. So for example, let's say you had your writing first, so you do your letter, I think that was an hour, and then as soon as that finishes, it times out and you then click next to start your next one. You don't know what the next one is. I think at the beginning, if I correct myself, the lady did tell us in the morning you're going to have, I don't know, I can't remember now, writing and drafting, and in the afternoon you're going to have the other 2, and so that was really helpful. And then so you sit those 2 and then you do have a break. I think it was like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, where you were allowed to leave. You weren't allowed to speak to anyone, but there was refreshments, water, and I think there was like biscuits or something, and obviously you weren't allowed to go back to your bag, which you put in the cloakroom. So anything that you needed, you brought with you. So, and then afterwards you go back in the room and you finish the other 2. The days are really long. I felt exhausted, and I would say for me the hardest thing was finishing day 1 knowing I had to go home and then come back for the next day to do the exact same thing 3 days in a row. And like I said earlier, I am a bit of a crammer. I should have probably gone home and relaxed and tried to forget about it. But I did. I went home and I literally studied really late. It didn't help me. I was so tired the next day. And it definitely did reflect in my scores. I didn't pass in, I think I passed SQE2 in third or fourth quintile. I literally scraped it. I'm very, very lucky. And I think that was mainly because I over panicked in the written exams. Even when I was writing it, I was just overthinking it. But I would say if you really are struggling with the law, or I think there was a question that I got and I literally looked at it and I thought, I do not know what to write. Like Barbri, they are really, really good and they do teach you enough. But there was a specific question that I thought, oh my God, I literally know one sentence about. And that was probably down to me, to be honest. It wasn't down to Barbri. And I just thought, you know, oh God. So I did waffle, and to be honest, I did really well in it. So it's not the end of the world if you don't know the law on something. If you know how to write a letter, or you generally can write decently, you will do fine. You will absolutely fine. In some of my SQE2 scores in the law, some of them I got ones, some I got twos, which you need threes to classify it as a pass. So in some of the law I did fail, but it was the skills that pulled me up, which was, threes, fours, fives. So don't think it's the end of the world if you get in there and you think, oh my God, I have no idea the procedure on this, or the law on this, because you can do it, definitely. In terms of after the written, so you have 3 days of the written and then you have your orals. I will caveat that by saying I know the year before they had their orals first. So you don't know what you're going to get. You may get your orals first, which is 2 days, and then you may have your 3 days of your written afterwards, or vice versa. I had my written first, and then I had my orals afterwards. But you do get a few dates to choose from for the booking. I remember there being maybe 4 different dates to choose from, and I chose the last date for the orals to give me enough time in between. Some people rather just get them out of the way and pick an earlier date. I picked the last ones, and on those days you attend the centre at the time that is you are told. I actually had the last slot of the day. You can't choose the slots, you just get given them. It's not something you can really dwell on about, to be honest. I think my exam, I had to get to the centre for 12, so I went there, got in there 12, registered. Again, that's all really quick. I found the process really quick. You get put into a main conference room with other people that are taking the exam with you, and there's maybe, in my room there was probably 10 tables, conference tables. There was maybe 8 of us around them, and you are kept in there until you are called for your exam. And that's because obviously there are so many other people in the building that have had morning slots or midday slots or whatever slots, so you can't cross over with them. You get escorted to the toilet, not the best, but it's just to make sure that you're not able to text people answers or bump into people in the corridor. I would say, which I didn't realise on the first day, is when you go in, whatever you bring in with you, that's all you can have. So some people, bless them, didn't bring any food in. They did provide a fruit bowl and I think some other few little snacks. It obviously wasn't enough to stay from 12 until 7 p.m. when I had my first oral exam. Some people were complaining, saying there should have been more guidance on that and they were stuck in a room all day. But to be honest, I literally went into the zone. I was doing my notes, looking at my notes, but then other people were discussing through things. Like one of my tables on one of the days, I was a bit stuck on something, someone else helped me out and it really, really did help. And the next day I sat on another table, and I was with a lot of people that weren't with my provider, and a lot of them were talking about things in a lot of depth, and that made me really panic. I would just say, don't try, to think too much about it. You know everything now. I definitely got really panicky because people were talking about case law and different types of statutes, and I literally thought, oh my God, I do not know any of this. But But yeah, that, you know, you just keep yourself to yourself if that's best for you, or you can obviously talk through things with people. But you are kept in there until your exam. I unfortunately was the last slot of the day, like I said, so I was in there for nearly 7 hours, and then I got taken up to my room, and I then went through to have the interview process, and then the advocacy. In terms of that, I will quickly go through that. For interview, you get put in another room with a smaller group of people. I think there's 7 of you, and you're with those people for all of your advocacy exams. So I was put in a room with them, and then they give you the brief, and you get a certain amount of time to do either your advocacy or your interview, client interview. You do that, and they tell you, okay, you must stop whatever you're doing now with your pen, put your pen down, and then they escort you to the client room, or the room where you're going to do your court advocacy. And it was literally like a corridor. Everyone stands in front of a door, and then they say, you may knock now. It's this time, you may knock. You enter. It does sound really daunting, and it was a bit daunting. But to be honest, the people that I had, they were fine. They were absolutely fine. My man was nodding a lot. He was going, and I just thought, oh my God, can he please shut up? I've missed my trail of thought. But they were honestly fine. You have a clock in both rooms. That it was honestly fine. I was really, really scared for the advocacy, but they were fine. Like I said, I ran over for both of them. But they just do a kind knock on the door. And then if you overrun the knock, which I did, they then open the door. But it was fine. As long as you've wrapped it up slightly, it's absolutely fine. And then obviously after that, you all walk out the room, you sit down, and then they say, you must not, you know, discuss this with anyone. And then they escort you out of the building, and you're let go for the day. Well, the last hours of the day, if you are the evening slot, and then you go back. But yeah, that's it really.
Perfect. And I just want to make sure that we've got enough time to go through the questions in the chat box. I'm going to come to you, Chloe, in a moment just to talk about reasonable adjustments. But just 2 things that's just come from what Holly said. You do only get a short break. I think it's about 15 minutes when you're doing the SQE2 exams. So definitely take food, drink, etc. with you. As the day goes on, the fruit and the food starts to dwindle that they give you. When I say food that they give you, it's basically a little snack. So definitely take something with you. Again, you need to take your ID with you. And the second thing that I was going to say, because people might not be aware of this, your written exams you do at the Pearson VUE test centres, the same as the SQE1. But the oral exams, you do them in hotels. So you'll get given a hotel, and I think you can only do Cardiff, Birmingham, Manchester and London. You have to go to one of those places. You can't do them anywhere else in the world. So that's just something to bear in mind if you are an international student. I'm going to come on to you then, Chloe, if I may, and just so you can talk about reasonable adjustments a little bit, how you applied for them, how it worked on the day for the exams, in terms of whether.
So my first tip is, if you think you can get reasonable adjustments, absolutely get them. They cover quite a lot of things, so I would have a look at the SRA guidance and see if there is anything that you think you might be able to get reasonable adjustments for. Tip, you don't need to have an official diagnosis of something to get reasonable adjustments, so the SRA do look at things holistically. So I'm a huge advocate for mental health in the legal profession. That means if you are really struggling with these exams, please do seek help, and make sure that you set yourself up to be able to be in the best possible position that you can be when taking these exams. So I was successful in my reasonable adjustment kind of application. When you go to sign up to do the SQE on the SRA website, there is a little box, I think, that you tick saying whether you will be applying for reasonable adjustments. If you tick yes, that's kind of all you need to do in terms of admin for the SQE, for the entire SQE1 and 2. So you will be assigned a disability kind of support liaison. They will call you, they will discuss with you what evidence you need to demonstrate that you need reasonable adjustments. If you are successful, then they will book your SQE exams for you. And these guys will tell you, I think it's very difficult to book a seat on the SQE exams. I think it's like Glastonbury, which is nuts because no one wants to be there. But it's very difficult. So that's a huge thing that's taken off your shoulders. The actual reasonable adjustments will be different depending on what it is that you've got. So I had extra time. That was incredibly helpful for me, because of what I struggle with. I maybe jump ahead or digress. I don't know if you've noticed. And I think the biggest thing was that we were in a small like test centre. So I think there was like 10 to 15 of us. And that was super helpful because otherwise I'd get really overwhelmed, I think, with the amount of people. And like, even though my test centre was quite small, there were people crying, and the type of person I am, like, I see someone cry, I start crying. And so I just think, bear that in mind, like in terms of the large test centres, don't look at what everyone else is doing. Who cares if someone else is like reading, and just do whatever makes you feel good. So focus on you. Yeah, SQE, so I'm trying to think, SQE1, and I'm trying to do this quick, so I do apologise. SQE1, I just had extra time, smaller location, fab. SQE2, completely different to everything that Holly's just said. So I think I was given a time of like 2:30, and I was a bit like, why have I been given this time? Because SRA guidance is rubbish. I don't mind saying that. I've told them that it's rubbish. And I was like, what the hell? Why am I there at 2:30? Because like Holly said, it does say on the SRA website, if you were given a 12:30 time slot, you're there for 7 hours. And I thought, well, 2:30, I'm there like till really late. The reason it's later is because if you have a reasonable adjustment, you go to the SQE2 test centre, you are immediately put into your own room, and you start straight away. So I was immediately given the question for my interview, and then the client came into my room, and then the client left, and then the judge for my advocacy came into my room. And I found that extremely helpful because I have lots of pens and papers, and I just had all my stuff everywhere, and it's my room. And it also meant that in between, I could get up and be like, oh my God, what am I doing? Oh my God, oh, my pen's got stuck. There you go. You can see why I have my own room. I just can't be surrounded by everyone freaking out. And so I think if you think that that might be something that is going to prevent you from doing as well as you possibly can, explore what reasonable adjustment options there are available for you. But I was very quick in completing like my SQE2 because, yeah, everything was in my room, one after the other. And I think they gave me like 15 minutes in between, but if I wanted to just go on to the next one, I could. That's the SQE2 oral exams. The SQE2 written, I was in exactly the same test centre that I was in for SQE1, which is really helpful because at least it's something vaguely familiar. It was a driving theory test centre, and I did have people doing their hazard perception next to me, so a bit distracting. But again, you do, like Holly mentioned, you just do like 2 immediately, have a little break, and then 2 more. And I just wanted to mention very quickly, because we've spoken a lot about the SQE2, and I have put it in the chat, but your SQE2 exams are marked 50% skill, 50% knowledge, and you might not necessarily need 50% overall to like pass. So just remember, if you don't know what they're asking you, I think Holly mentioned it, like I had a question where I had absolutely no idea about the law. It was really ultra specific, and something that I noticed in the entire SQE exams, SQE1 and 2, they asked a lot of very niche questions. and particularly in the SQE2, you have the scope to write about God knows what, but you've set it out really well and you've persuaded whoever it is that you're writing to that what you're saying is correct. And thinking about that really helped me in terms of my mental health in the run up to the exam. Because I said to myself, if I get a question and I have no idea what it's about, as long as I write or speak really confidently and really well and I'm really articulate, I will pass. And hopefully that did happen. So just for SQE2, you do have that buffer. And particularly if you were working like I was at the same time and they asked you to write an email, I spent 2 years writing emails to clients. So it's that you have that buffer. And I would say if you haven't been working whilst you're doing your SQE2 course or SQE1, just make sure you are doing all these things. So I don't know, email your parents or your friends, get into the habit of learning these skills, write a letter. I practiced my advocacy in front of all of my friends. I interviewed my family because I knew they'd be really difficult. Like do it, don't just read it, do it. But I guess that's only if you're a doer learner. But yeah, so reasonable adjustments, if you can get them. If you don't know anything about them, read about them, see what you can get, because I don't think I would have passed without them.
Perfect. And I just want to add that a lot of this information is on the SQE SRE website. I've put a few links in about what is the SQE, how to plan for the day, the specifications for SQE1 and SQE2 are on there. Learn that website or learn how to navigate it, because everything that you need, apart from a rundown of actually what happens on the days, that's why we're doing this, you will find on there. So make sure that you're familiar with that. I'm just going to go through some of the questions then now, if I may. I think we've answered the first one, but what did you feel was an effective revision strategy for memorising the content for SQE1? Alana, I'll go to you if I can.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, don't worry. You've been waiting a while, sorry. What do you feel was an effective revision strategy for memorising content for SQE1? Was there a strategy above and beyond?
I actually use, and it's a free resource and it's definitely worth using if flashcards work for you, but it's a website called Quizlet. Effectively, you can create your own flashcards, and if anyone's created flashcards on that topic before, they'll be available. So you might even be able to access some that I made back in the day, and I'm happy to share them if you want them. But effectively, you can input all the information and make your own flashcards on there. You can download the app on your phone, and then depending on, there's a level of free stuff, and then you can pay for premium. But it also allows you to test yourself, and there's different mechanisms for testing. There's multiple choice questions you can do, match up, write the answers in. And I think content-wise, if flashcards is the way you work, it's a brilliant app to use. I've used it all the way through since secondary school, through uni and to SQE level, so it's definitely a lifesaver for me personally. And again, I think I just worked my way down. I think I had this absolute massive notes that were hundreds of pages long through the whole of SQE1 prep, and then I eventually just kept condensing down each topic. Every time I reviewed, I took things out that I didn't feel that were necessary, or rephrased it so that it was shorter. And by the time I basically ended up with A3 sheets of paper. But I think the more times you go over it, the more you know the broader stuff, and it's just those key things to pinpoint on your notes.
Did anybody else have any other revision strategies that they've not already shared? I think we've pretty much gone through quite a lot of them. The next question is, as someone with stammering, I'm scared about the SQE2 and the practical speaking part. Will I be marked down due to my stammering? I'm just going to open it up to everybody if you can answer the questions, whoever wants to.
I'll take this one. Look,
I would just say on this, go on. Go on.
I don't, sorry, thank you, Paige. Look, I think make a reasonable adjustment request, speak to your disability liaison officer. They are incredible people, and they will be able to give you that answer. That isn't something, I mean, I don't know if Paige, were going to give an answer. I don't think it's an answer we have. I don't know if anyone understands or knows the minds of the markers. I think we'd all love to. But I think speak to your disability liaison officer and they will be a lifesaver for you.
Absolutely. And I think that I do know somebody that does struggle with stammering, and they have passed the SQE, and they're now a qualified solicitor going into the magistrates court every day. So it is possible, but I think you need to learn how to cope with it. Obviously, we can't comment on how you manage that. And if there are, it's going to be a daunting experience. It's a daunting experience for everybody, but I think it's useful for you to have a think about how you're going to manage that. And also practice. The more you practice, I'm sure the less nervous you will be. And that's going to help you massively. So that's just something to bear in mind. But it's definitely not the be all and end all, and you're not going to fail because you stammer. The next question is, did you spend more time revising for business law and practice? As I've heard SRA puts more questions about that particular subject compared to the rest of the subjects. I mean, I think that's an interesting question in terms of business law as well, but across the board, did people find that there was an even split in terms of subject areas on, for example, the SQE1, or did more topics come up more frequently than others?
I personally found a big weighted difference, particularly in the SQE1, the first set of exams on day one. I didn't really touch on like the administration side of things. The first section was very heavy on business law and land law. Personally, that's how I felt in terms of the split. I think it's when you're weaker on subjects as well, you feel like you're more targeted naturally.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I felt like there was a lot of tax questions, but when I finished the exams, I thought, do you know what? It's probably because I hate tax. So I do agree with you there. I think you're going to think there's more of something that you're weaker at, but don't think it's the end of the world, because it's honestly not. We all passed, and we had areas that we absolutely hated.
I think every exam is going to be different. So I think possibly, Holly, you had lots of tax because I didn't have any tax. So I think it's very different. I think as well for SQE2, in the written, it's 3 days of written exams and 1 day is exclusively business. And that is because there is no business oral exams. And so I think it's just, it might feel like it's weighted more because you have to learn it slightly differently than you would disputes in terms of the oral. What you learn for, I don't know, it's all very different, but don't listen to what I think don't listen to what other people have experienced in their SQE1. It changes every year. Don't predict it. If you try and predict it, you're setting yourself up to fail. Spread yourself all over, because it changes every year. And remember, it's so new that they're trying to figure out what the split should be. So yeah, don't listen to the crowd. The crowd might be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if I sat it at the same time as you, Chloe, but I didn't have much tax or solicitors accounts on mine, so it obviously changes throughout the years. So I'm not coming at you, Holly. I'm sure that your exam did have a lot, but yeah, it's just something to bear in mind. The next question is, based on what you have seen from other prep courses, would you pick Barbri if you had the opportunity to choose another? I guess that applies for ULaw and Barbri. Would you pick your course? Oh, yep. I think.
Can you hear? I think you're breaking up.
Yeah, I can't really hear you, Paige, either. Sorry.
I can hear you. Oh, okay. Would you pick your course providers again?
I would say yes, I think when I was doing the exams, specifically the SQE2, when, like I said, I was sat in a big room with people that had loads of different providers, that's when I thought I am never doing Barbri again, because everyone was talking about everything in so much depth. They had so many notes, all of these big books, and I do generally think Barbri tends to teach you how to pass. They don't teach you to do amazingly, although I will say I have got friends that did amazingly. And, you know, in SQE1, I did pass in the first quintile in one of them, surprisingly. But I do think, you know, you do constantly compare. But I just think all of these course providers, especially the main ones, they're all known to do well. People pass. And I know you get hooked down in Googling, you know, the pass rates of, you know, the different providers. But at the end of the day, it's you in the exam. As long as you feel confident in what you know, you just have to trust in what they're teaching you. So I do think I personally would definitely do it with Barbri, but I'm sure anyone that is with anyone would be able to do really well as long as they apply themselves to what their providers are telling them to do, and they put in the hours, they will definitely pass.
Absolutely. I can see that somebody's asked for an opinion on BPP. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from BPP here. It's not for any particular reason. Same for QLTS, all of the other providers. We can't comment, I guess, on how they are as providers because we've not sat exams with them. But as Holly has just said, they're all good providers. So you just pick the one that feels right for you, or just get the books, and I'm sure you can pass without doing the course if needs be. So I'm going to come to you, Olivia, because you've just started as a trainee. The next question is, from the knowledge you have learned from the SQE, would you say you feel more confident going into your role as a trainee, or do you feel that the
I think there is a lot of good knowledge that you learn on the SQE, which it has actually been helpful. I guess it depends what area of law you go into. But I think definitely stuff that I've learned in business law has been very useful and like a good base for a trainee going into commercial law. But yeah, I definitely think it has been good, especially some of the skills, not too bad as well for going in. But yeah, I definitely think you're maybe a bit more prepared than if you have done the LPC. I think you have to know sort of more content and more different topics. I do actually think you're probably better prepared to be a trainee with the SQE than rather than the LPC. But obviously, I can't confirm because I haven't done the LPC. That's just my personal opinion.
Can I just interject there? Just because I think one of the key differences with the LPC and the SQE is that when you take the LPC, they are marking you as a day one trainee. And with the SQE, they are marking you as a day one solicitor. And I think that is a huge difference. And I think that's why the pass rate is maybe hugely different, because the standard that they are assessing you at is completely different. It's 2 years. So I think just going with what Olivia said, I think it's very difficult to be a day one solicitor before you've even done your training contract, which I think is where I preferred doing my training contract alongside studying. But to bring it back to your question, Paige, I absolutely love my ULaw books and I am not giving them up. And I've just started in a new firm, and you bet that I have a bookshelf with all of my ULaw books, particularly with things like disputes, which is what I've qualified into. CPR hasn't changed too much, and it's there. So I definitely think it's super helpful.
I'd also like to mention, if I can, don't think it is the end of the world if you are qualifying or you want to qualify in an area that you don't do for the SQE. I personally, I'm in family law, so I was thinking I'm literally studying all of these exams and nothing applies, and I can't apply my daily job really to it in terms of the knowledge. but it definitely helps, you know, your everyday work, sending emails, the skills, you know, and it's litigation, anything like that does really set you up to be a good trainee as well. But yeah, I don't think it's the end of the world if, you know, you are doing an area that, you know, doesn't actually fit in with the SQE at all, really.
Perfect. I'm just conscious of time, but I'm going to go through a few more questions if I can. There's a question about SQE2 exemptions. I don't think anyone here applied for an exemption. I tried to apply for some form of exemption because I did the bar course, but unfortunately, if you've done the bar course, you're not entitled. If you did the LPC, though, you are entitled to an exemption to SQE1. But again, you still need to know all the knowledge for your SQE2, so I'm not sure how helpful that is for people. There is, do you feel like having worked in law prior to doing your SQE2 was advantageous? I think Holly and Chloe have answered that, but because the skills are marked so heavily, it's definitely useful. So, and that's the takeaway from that for those that have not seen that in the chat.
I would also say, sorry,
undergraduate.
If you look at the actual statistics, people tend to do well, even more well, that they haven't actually had work experience. So I would definitely say, don't think if you don't have a job or you don't have previous legal work experience, you're not going to do well, especially in SQE2, because the statistics show otherwise. So that's a good thing to look at.
Perfect. And there's a question here about how well did your provider prepare you for the oral exams? I think a big concern for lots of people are the advocacy exams, the client interviewing. How well did you?
I think we've all missed you again, Paige, so I'll just fill. I didn't.
Is it me?
I think it is you.
How well did the providers prepare you for the
Look, I think mine was very difficult because it was an online only course. So I didn't feel very prepared at all. And I think one thing to kind of remember is that because this is a new exam and there's lots of confidentiality and NDAs, not all the providers, like they have the SRA syllabus, but then they interpret that to their own kind of song sheet. And I definitely had a question that I had never heard of in my orals. And so I think that is where you need to just be confident in your skill, because like you just don't know what you're going to get. And I think that the one thing that I did that was super helpful is, like, with two other trainees who were doing SQE2, we like interviewed each other. We did a little advocacy together. Like, we all took a question that we found online, like just Google SQE2 question, found something, and then we like did 45 minutes prep, and then we just did advocacy, and we all like scored each other, and we like made it fun because revising is really boring and you just need to get it done. So we did like a little Strictly Come Dancing, like you got 7 and even better if type of thing. But I think, yeah, you've got to do a lot of it on your own and just pray that you get a question that you know, or that your skill is good enough that you can deal with it.
Absolutely. And one thing that I would say about the advocacy, you don't really get to learn that much about it as a solicitor, unfortunately, but there's something called the Advocacy Club, which is on LinkedIn, it's online. It is run by a CPS lawyer. Go to that. I think it's £10 for God knows how many sessions. Practice through them. Record yourself. That's what we got taught when I did the bar course, which is absolutely embarrassing, but it's a good way to learn, to watch yourself back, and also go into the exams with a structure. So have a general structure that you're going to follow no matter what the question, and speak slowly and you will get the skills. Similar to Chloe, I'm thinking we probably sat the same exam. I also got something in the advocacy that I'd not seen before and that was not part of the syllabus, but they will give you the answer. So just read the document and the answer is there. That's all I would say on that. Perfect. Well, I think that that's pretty much most of the questions. We've missed a few. Sorry about that, but I've already kept these lovely ladies for long enough. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm sure that if you have any burning questions, Alana, Olivia, Holly, or Chloe will be very happy to answer them. Or if not, if you ask me, I'm also happy to help. Thank you, ladies, so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure that everybody else has benefited greatly from it. I'm going to pause the recording there, and everybody's free to leave whenever you like.